There was something odd about the mantelpiece. It looked normal at first, polished oak frame, carved with religious figures, the Virgin's face halfway cracked by heat from the fire. But above it, resting right on the wood like any hunting trophy, sat a child's skull. A small, delicate one, perhaps no older than 10. And it wasn't alone. This was one of many. The walls bore the same horror. Tiny bones arranged like holy relics. Skulls, jawbones, sometimes little boots, as if the children hadn't disappeared at all, just been quietly transferred from life into decoration. Witnesses described it with terror. This was not a battlefield, not a plague pit. This was the home of a nobleman. A celebrated general. A war hero of France. And this was what he kept in his private chamber. Before history knew him as a monster, before pamphlets would one day call him France's Bluebeard, there was just this room. The fire. The bones. And a silence more damning than blood. He was born into wealth so vast it could feed villages for generations, and power so absolute it never had to explain itself. Gilles de Montmorency-Laval, known to history as Gilles de Rais, came into the world in 1404, in the shadows of towering castles and cold stone chapels. His father was a brutal warlord, the kind of noble who would hang a peasant for stepping too loudly, and his mother, well, she died early. Some say illness, others say childbirth. It didn't matter. The women in stories like this rarely survive the opening act. At just 10 years old, Gilles was orphaned. His father died in a hunting accident, trampled or pierced, no one's quite sure, and the boy was passed like property to his grandfather, a man named Jean de Crayon. Jean was no warm guardian. He was a schemer, a politician, a man obsessed with wealth, alliances, and titles. To him, Gilles was not a child, but a weapon. A tool to carve more power. And so, before Gilles could read, he was being groomed to rule. Groomed to command. Groomed to kill. Gilles never had a childhood. What he had was instruction, brutal, relentless, and soaked in blood. His grandfather, Jean de Crayon, didn't believe in softness. He believed in strategy, in war, and in bending people to your will. And so, while other boys learned Latin prayers or played with carved wooden horses, Gilles learned how to torture. How to ride. How to kill. His first education wasn't in a chapel, it was on the training field, where squires screamed as their arms were broken for sport, and where a wrong answer earned the whip. He watched animals die slowly to test their screams. He saw servants hanged for theft, or nothing at all. And he was told, always, that this was strength. That cruelty was the foundation of nobility. Jean tried to marry him off young, not out of love, but alliance. At 12, Gilles was offered to a young heiress. When her father refused the match, Jean kidnapped him. That's not poetic exaggeration. He literally abducted the man until he changed his mind. This is the world Gilles grew up in. A world where people were tools, and fear was the only proper language. Before he became a monster, Gilles de Rais was a hero. Not a quiet one either, a knight in gleaming armor, charging into battle at the side of a saint. When Joan of Arc rose from the villages of France, claiming visions and voices, it was Gilles who rode with her. He was young, handsome, terrifying in combat. And for a while, he was exactly what France needed, a symbol of defiance. Together, they reclaimed Orleans, shattered English lines, and turned the tide of the 100 Years' War. Gilles was named Marshal of France at just 24. His banners flew high, embroidered with dragons and fire, and peasants cheered him like a savior. Joan prayed, Gilles executed. She saw divine light, he saw tactical advantage. But the world only saw glory. They stood together at coronations, spoke before kings. And when Joan was captured and burned, it was said Gilles wept. Publicly. Loudly. But no one asked what he did afterward. No one noticed that the young hero, now blood-soaked and aimless, had lost the only person who believed in redemption. And the war, like all wars, had taught him that killing could be sacred, if done in the name of order. War had made Gilles rich. But peace made him dangerous. With no battles left to fight, no kings to impress, and no saints to follow, Gilles turned inward. And what he found there was rot. He withdrew from the royal court and retreated to his private estates, dragging behind him an army of actors, alchemists, clerics, and masked strangers. He built private theaters with gold-plated stages. Commissioned operas so elaborate they bankrupted towns. Some performances required hundreds of costumes, dozens of live horses, and fireworks imported from Italy, all for an audience of 5. He threw feasts where food was served on solid silver, and any guest who displeased him vanished before dessert. The church warned him. His family begged him. But Gilles didn't care. He was no longer bound by God or reason. He was searching for something deeper, something darker. He began to dabble in the occult. Not in the playful sense, but in the medieval, Bonan blood way. Strange men arrived at his castles carrying satchels of powders, animal parts, and books banned by the Pope. One of them, a defrocked priest named Prelati, promised he could summon demons. Gilles believed him. And so began the rituals. The sacrifices. The pact-making. A Marshal of France, once the golden boy of battle, was now kneeling in candlelight, begging Satan for gold. On the surface, it looked like devotion. Gilles de Rais, Marshal of France, had built a chapel. A beautiful one. Marble floors. Gold trim. Choir boys in white. He named it the Chapel of Holy Innocents, a tribute, he claimed, to the children slaughtered in the Bible by King Herod. He said it was for redemption. For prayer. For the souls of the young. And yet, behind its altar, something else stirred. Witnesses would later say the chapel became a trap. That it was here the first children vanished. Boys, mostly. 8, 9, 10 years old. They were told they could sing for the marshal. Serve him. Be part of his choir. The lucky ones were turned away. The others were never seen again. Gilles had created more than a church. He had created a machine. A spiritual veil over a machine of death. Servants were ordered not to ask questions. Those who did disappeared. Those who helped were rewarded with coin. The choir sang louder. The doors remained open. And the Chapel of Holy Innocents became what no one wanted to believe it was, a shrine to slaughter, disguised as faith. At first, it was just rumors. Whispers in the countryside. A boy who never came home. A servant who vanished after delivering a letter. But by 1432, it became a pattern. Children were disappearing, always near Gilles de Rais's estates. They vanished from fields, from town squares, from church steps. Some were poor. Others were the children of merchants, craftsmen, even low nobility. It didn't matter. They were taken. And they never returned. Locals began to notice the riders. Men in dark cloaks, armed and silent, sent by the marshal to offer work, or a place in his choir, or simply sweets. The children followed. The children never returned. Parents wept, begged, searched. But how do you accuse a nobleman? A national hero. One of the richest men in France. Gilles de Rais still threw lavish feasts. He still built chapels. And he still smiled when priests visited. But behind his stone walls, things were getting darker. Some said screams were heard at night. Others claimed to see smoke rise from locked towers. Servants began to flee. Witnesses began to speak. And by 1437, even the church could no longer pretend not to hear. Something monstrous was happening in the lands of Gilles de Rais, and no amount of gold could silence it forever. He no longer killed out of impulse. Now he killed with purpose. With ritual. Gilles de Rais believed he could make gold from blood. Not metaphorically, literally. His descent into alchemy began with whispers from charlatans and magicians, men who promised hidden knowledge in exchange for gold. And he gave it. At first, they asked only for books, symbols, rare herbs. But then came the darker requests: animal parts, bones, human remains, blood. Lots of it. Gilles listened. Because Gilles was desperate. He had burned through his fortune. His estates were crumbling. His power slipping. So he tried to bargain with hell. In secret chambers beneath his castles, he and a defrocked priest named Prelati performed rituals, ancient words, painted circles, mutilated bodies laid out on cold stone. The children, by now, were not just victims. They were ingredients. Gilles believed that the purer the soul, the stronger the sacrifice. That children, clean, innocent, unspoiled, could buy him wealth beyond kings. He watched them scream. He wrote down their reactions. And when it was done, he prayed. Not to God, but to whatever answered from the dark. In those years, Gilles wasn't just killing. He was experimenting. And he truly believed that each murder brought him closer to immortality, or at least, solvency. They finally came for him in 1440. Not with swords, but with parchment. Gilles de Rais was arrested on charges of murder, heresy, and sorcery. But something about the arrest felt calculated. The church had tolerated him for years. The nobles had taken his money. Now, when his fortune had vanished and his influence had dried up, they struck. Gilles was dragged before an ecclesiastical court. He wasn't tortured. Not yet. But he was surrounded. Outnumbered. Isolated. And then, to everyone's shock, he confessed. Not reluctantly. Not vaguely. But in agonizing detail. He named the children. Described the murders. Told the court how they cried, how they screamed, how they died. He confessed to over 100 killings. Some say 200. He wept. He begged for forgiveness. He claimed the devil had taken him. The judges believed him. Or said they did. But years later, historians began to ask, why did he confess so easily? Was it guilt or coercion? Was it remorse or politics? His lands were valuable. His name inconvenient. Some believe he was framed. Others think he was mentally ill. But the record remains: a war hero, once beloved, now sat in chains and admitted to crimes so vile they echoed for centuries. Whether he was telling the truth or repeating what his captors demanded, no one could say for sure. On October 26, 1440, Gilles de Rais was led to the gallows. Not dragged. Not screaming. But calmly, as if to a royal ceremony. Thousands came to watch. Peasants. Nobles. Priests. They wanted to see the fall of a monster, or the martyrdom of a man. Gilles wore a black robe. He held a crucifix. And he walked with strange dignity. Before the noose was placed, he gave a final confession. He wept again, prayed again, and asked the crowd to forgive him. Some did. Others cursed. His body was burned after death, a common punishment for heretics, but not before something strange happened. The executioner knelt, asked forgiveness, kissed Giles's hand. Some say the crowd cried. Some say they clapped. And some say they stood in stunned silence, unsure of what they had just witnessed. A monster. A victim. A war hero destroyed by madness. Or a scapegoat destroyed by greed. Gilles de Rais, once Marshal of France, champion of Joan of Arc, was now ash and myth. But the children were still gone. And no ritual, no political trial, no carefully staged confession would ever bring them back. Nearly 5 centuries after his death, in 1992, Gilles de Rais went back on trial. Not in a courtroom, but in a theater. A mock retrial staged by writers, lawyers, and historians, curious to revisit one of France's darkest legends. They pored over ancient testimony, questioned confessions extracted without torture, compared records from church and crown. And they found gaps, inconsistencies, convenient silences. Witnesses had been paid. Some never saw anything. The court that sentenced Gilles had motives, political, financial, even spiritual. After all, how useful was it to the church that a former war hero turned to Satan? How useful was it to the crown to confiscate his lands after a conviction? Some modern scholars claim the entire trial was a fabrication, that Gilles was eccentric, wasteful, immoral, but not a killer. Others insist the evidence is too detailed, too horrible to be fiction. 100 dead children can't just vanish into legend. And so, the doubt lingers. Was he guilty? Was he framed? Or was it something worse, a man who believed he was innocent, even as he built altars of bones? In the end, no retrial could answer that. The stage went dark. The audience applauded. And the shadow of Gilles de Rais remained, intact, unresolved, eternal. In the end, Gilles de Rais may have been a monster. Or he may have been a scapegoat. But either way, his story reveals something deeper, something far more disturbing than blood or bones. It shows what justice looked like in the medieval world. A place where trials were theater. Where confession meant salvation, even if it was forced. Where the church burned bodies to cleanse souls, and kings erased enemies with parchment and prayer. In that world, horror wasn't hidden. It was institutional. Ritualized. A nobleman could fund wars and slaughter peasants and still be called righteous, until the money ran out. A child's death only mattered if it embarrassed the wrong people. And truth was whatever survived the fire. Gilles de Rais was a man devoured by that world. Whether he murdered or not, he was made by violence, raised in cruelty, rewarded for savagery, and finally, destroyed by the same system that built him. That is the real horror, not the man, but the mirror. Because history is not a tale of good and evil. It's a liturgy of power. And sometimes, monsters aren't born. They're taught. Then crowned.